Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. Tonight, we're not diving into fantasy, but into one of the deepest questions of science and philosophy. Why did we humans become conscious? Not the quick answers or dramatic speculations, but the slow, careful story built from evolution, biology, and memory. We don't claim to have all the answers, no one does. But we do have the clues, the bones, the fossils, the fragile sparks of evidence that point toward how awareness might have emerged, and if you drift off halfway through, that's perfectly fine. This story will wait for you. If this kind of quiet, long-form storytelling helps you rest, focus, or simply feel less alone at the end of a noisy day, consider liking and subscribing. It helps this channel find more curious sapiens like you. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. The flickering torchlight dances across the cold, damp stone, and for a moment, the rock breathes. A pair of eyes, deep and knowing, stares back from the darkness. They are not human, not entirely perhaps an auroch, a stag, a creature of a world long since vanished. Yet, in their silent gaze, etched by a hand tens of thousands of years cold, there is a profound and unsettling recognition. This is not merely a drawing. It is a look, a conscious act of seeing, cast across an unimaginable gulf of time. We came to these caves to discover our ancestors. Instead, we find them observing us. What did they see when they looked inward, and what does their gaze, preserved in ochre and charcoal, reflect back to us about the nature of our own minds? This act of looking back is the first whisper of a profound cognitive leap. Biologically, we are one of the few species capable of metacognition, the ability to think about our own thinking. It is a silent internal conversation, a hall of mirrors within the mind, orchestrated by the intricate neural symphony of the prefrontal cortex. This is not just problem-solving, it is the foundation of a self that can stand apart from its own instincts and ask, "Who am I?" The archaeological record offers a tangible echo of this internal world. The galleries of Lascaux and Chauvet are more than prehistoric art, they are cathedrals of the nascent mind. These are not simple sketches of survival, but complex narratives of memory and imagination, a symbolic consciousness spilling onto the walls. They represent a mind that does not just exist, but times recollects asterisk, that does not just fear, but times dreams asterisk. In our modern world, we experience a faint echo of this when we look into the eyes of a painted portrait. We feel a presence, a someone, looking out from the canvas. But is that presence in the paint, or is it a reflection of our own conscious mind, projecting its own self-awareness onto the stillness? Our consciousness allows us to not only succeed but to be a mystery to ourselves. Yet, is this interpretation itself a projection of our own vanity? The creation of art is not an irrefutable certificate of a self-aware mind. Many animals exhibit complex, learned behaviors from the intricate dances of bees to the tool use of crows without any evidence they possess an inner I. Could the breathtaking murals of the cave simply be the result of sophisticated mimicry, an unconscious cultural tradition passed down through generations, devoid of the profound introspection we so eagerly assign to them? Perhaps we are the ones telling stories in the dark, desperate to see our own reflection in the silent eyes of the past. What separates a deeply ingrained ritual from a conscious act of creation? The true marvel of Lascaux, then, may not lie in the technical skill, impressive as it is. It is in the palimpsest of images, layer upon layer, generation upon generation, a collective memory being built in the dark. This was not a single artist's fleeting vision, but a sustained, shared dream. It forces a larger, more haunting question. What kind of brain is capable of not only remembering the shape of a bison, but of holding the times of the bison, of weaving it into myth, and then of choosing a specific, sacred darkness in which to preserve that dream for millennia? The brain that could do this was clearly more than just a tool for survival. But was its growing size alone enough to cradle such a vast and luminous inner world? Sheer volume, it turns out, is a poor measure of luminosity. The human brain is 3 times larger than that of our primate cousins, a significant evolutionary investment. But this expansion alone is not the source of the light within. It is the rewiring of the interior, the quiet, explosive growth of the prefrontal cortex that seems to have made the difference. This region, sitting behind our foreheads, acts less like a storage unit and more like a master conductor, orchestrating the chaotic symphony of sensory data into a unified, seamless experience. It is the seat of deliberation, of impulse control, of imagining futures that do not yet exist. Here, the raw signal of pain is woven with memory and fear to become suffering. The sensation of light on the retina is blended with recognition and longing to become beauty. This is the alchemy of consciousness, the transformation of mere information into inner life. But if this neural integration is the key, then where does the symphony end and the conductor begin? Is the self merely the sum of this biological process, or is it something that listens to the music? We often pride ourselves on having the largest brain among primates. It is a fact, a point of biological distinction. But an elephant's brain is massive, and it does not write poetry. A sperm whale's brain is the largest on Earth, and it composes no symphonies. So, what is it, truly, that ignites the spark of consciousness within us? Is it merely a matter of volume, of raw computational power, or is it something more elusive, something woven into the very architecture of our minds? Look closer at the biology. The human brain is not just large, it is peculiarly organized. The prefrontal cortex, that region just behind our foreheads, is disproportionately vast. This is the seat of executive function, of planning and complex social behavior. But perhaps more telling is a hidden network that lights up when we are doing, seemingly, nothing at all. Scientists call it the default mode network. When our minds are not focused on the outside world, this network hums with activity. It is the engine of self-reflection, of daydreaming, of mentally time-traveling, to replay past conversations or imagine future possibilities. It is the physical stage where the private theater of the self is performed. The brain, in its quiet moments, talks to itself. It tells itself stories. It builds a narrative where I am the central character. Is this internal storytelling the first draft of consciousness? The archaeological record offers us fragments of this story's beginning. The skulls of times, Homo erectus times, show a steady increase in cranial capacity. They had bigger brains than their ancestors, and they crafted sophisticated hand axes. Yet, for hundreds of thousands of years, their tools remained largely the same. Then, with the dawn of times, Homo sapiens *, something shifted. We find not just tools, but multi-purpose blades and projectile points. We find ochre for body paint, shells carefully pierced for necklaces, and grave sites where the dead were laid to rest with tokens and tools. Here, in the cold soil, is the first tangible evidence of a mind that saw more than survival. It saw symbolism. It saw an identity that could be decorated, and a life that might continue beyond death. Was this the moment our ancestors first looked at a shell and saw not food, but beauty? Was this the dawn of a mind that could ask, "What does this mean?" In our modern age, we have created a new kind of mind to hold a mirror to our own. Artificial intelligence can process language, defeat grandmasters in chess, and diagnose diseases. It can mimic understanding with breathtaking accuracy, yet it does not know that it is playing a game. It processes the move, but it feels no thrill of victory or sting of defeat. It has no inner world. Our brains, however, do not just process information, they experience it. They translate electrical signals into the searing red of a sunset, the crushing weight of grief, the quiet comfort of memory. What is this alchemy that transforms biochemistry into being? Is consciousness the light generated by the sheer, complex friction of billions of neurons communicating? Yet, a troubling counterpoint emerges from the shadows of neuroscience. There are documented cases where the human brain develops, is structurally intact, and yet the light of self-awareness is absent. In certain comatose states or profound neurological disorders, the machinery of the brain may still be running, but the operator has vanished. The body functions, but the person is gone. This suggests a haunting possibility. What if consciousness is not the main event? What if it is merely an epiphenomenon, a beautiful, complex, but ultimately incidental byproduct of neural computation, like steam rising from a locomotive? If the brain can operate without it, is consciousness then a luxury and not a necessity? So, if size alone is not enough, and structure is only part of the answer, then the key must lie in the dynamic interplay, the specific way our neural circuits fire and wire together. It is a recipe, not just an ingredient. And in the crucible of our evolutionary history, as this unique brain was taking shape, another, more unexpected ingredient was being forged in the fires of survival. It was not just intelligence, or tool use, or language. It was something darker, more primal, that may have been the final catalyst. Fear. For fear is the oldest teacher. It taught our ancestors to flee from the predator's shadow, to freeze at the snap of a twig. It is the raw, visceral emotion of self-preservation. But what happens when the immediate danger passes? When the body is safe, but the mind remains restless? The fear does not simply vanish, it turns inward. It learns to project itself into an uncertain tomorrow. It becomes the gnawing awareness of one's own vulnerability, the certain knowledge that this body, this self, will one day cease to be. The brain, with its newfound capacity for memory and foresight, could now hold the concept of its own end. It could be afraid not just of the saber-toothed cat, but of death itself. Could it be that this profound, existential fear, the terror of non-existence, was the very pressure that forced the human mind to fully awaken, to grasp its own fragile existence in a vast and indifferent universe? What does it mean for our consciousness to be born not from a place of calm understanding, but from a primordial scream? The deer hears a rustle in the undergrowth, and in an instant it is gone, a blur of brown and white fleeing into the deeper woods. Our ancestors, too, knew this primal startle, this electric jolt that commands the body to run or to fight. But then, something shifted. There came a moment, perhaps by a fading fire under a star-strewn sky, when a human, hearing that same rustle, did not immediately run. Instead, they paused. And in that pause, a new and terrifying capacity was born, the imagination to ask, "What if I am not fast enough?" This is the awakening from fear. It is not merely the fear of the present moment, the sharp-toothed reality in the here and now. It is the fear of a possible future, a ghost that haunts a time that has not yet come. Biologically, we are wired with the same ancient alarm system as the deer. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, the heart hammers against the ribs, preparing the body for a single, decisive action. Yet, with the development of the prefrontal cortex, this system was gifted or cursed with a new component. We gained the ability to run the scenario times before times it happened, to analyze the threat from every angle in the safety of our own minds. This is anticipatory anxiety, the price of consciousness, a constant, low-grade hum of dread that is the soundtrack to our foresight. The archaeological record offers silent testimony to this mental leap. We find not just the scattered bones of a successful hunt, but the deliberate architecture of dread, trenches dug around settlements, walls of stone piled high, intricate traps designed to maim what might emerge from the forest. These are not reactions, they are preemptive strikes against phantoms. They are the physical manifestations of a brain that has learned to fear tomorrow, to build defenses against the shadow of a predator that has not yet shown its face. In our modern world, the predators have changed form. We fear the silent phone that means a job lost, the mirror that reflects a new wrinkle, the hollow space in a shared bed. These fears are abstract, untethered from immediate physical danger. They are the intricate byproducts of an intellect that can project itself into a web of social and emotional contingencies, that can watch a hypothetical version of itself fail, be rejected, or be forgotten. The rustle in the bushes has been replaced by the rustle of a calendar page turning. Yet, is this anxiety truly ours alone? A bird meticulously weaves a nest, hidden from prying eyes. A hive of bees toils through the summer, stockpiling golden sweetness for the barren winter. They are acting on a fear of hunger, of exposure, of the end. Is anxiety, then, not the hallmark of a complex mind, but simply an evolved, deeply ingrained survival instinct shared across the living world? A biological imperative written into the very code of life. Perhaps the distinction lies not in the feeling of fear itself, but in its object. The bird fears a winter it has known, the bee fears a scarcity it has inherited. But a human can fear a winter of the soul they have never experienced, a scarcity of love they have never endured. We are the only animal that can be terrified of things that have never happened and may never come to pass. And to give shape to these formless apparitions, to make them tangible so that they might be faced, our ancestors performed their first and most profound act of alchemy. They invented a weapon, a shield, and a prison all in one. They invented language. And so, if our consciousness was born from the echo of a rustle in the grass, what new form of being did we create when we first learned to give that echo a name? I think, therefore I am, Descartes wrote, carving a foundational truth of philosophy from the quiet of his study. But what if the very word I was the first and most necessary ingredient? Without that singular, self-referential symbol, how would he have known it was times who was thinking? The thought itself seems to require the language to hold it. Language, then, is not merely a tool for describing our inner world. It is the mirror in which the mind first glimpses its own reflection, the loom on which the tapestry of self is woven. Deep within the folds of the human brain, in regions known as Broca's and Wernicke's areas, a silent alchemy takes place. Here, a storm of electrical signals is transformed. A fleeting feeling of warmth is not just a neural firing pattern, it becomes the word comfort. A complex memory of a sunset is no longer a mere sensory replay. It becomes a narrative, a story we can tell ourselves. This biological machinery is a converter, turning the raw, analog data of experience into digital symbols, nouns, verbs, adjectives. It is through this lexical filter that the blur of existence gains resolution. We can isolate me from the world, the past from the future, the real from the possible. Before language, was the mind a room full of objects in the dark? Language throws the switch, and suddenly we can see what was always there, giving form to the formless and a name to the nameless. But in illuminating the room, does the light also cast long, distorting shadows, framing what we see and hiding what remains in the lexicon's gloom? This internal mirror did not appear overnight. We can trace its ghostly emergence in the bones and artifacts left behind. The hyoid bone, a delicate horseshoe-shaped structure in the throat of our times, Homo sapiens times ancestors, is a piece of fossilized possibility. Its architecture suggests a larynx capable of producing the complex phonemes that rudimentary grunts could not. Then, the evidence begins to accumulate in the archaeological record. Ochre for body paint, beads for adornment, elaborate burial rituals with grave goods. These are not the tools of mere survival. They are the artifacts of symbolic thought. They speak of a world where a shell is no longer just a shell, but a symbol of status or beauty, where death is not just an end, but a transition to another state, a story told by the living about the dead. Language became the thread that could stitch one generation to the next, allowing knowledge and identity to accumulate, to become collective, to become culture. A single human lifetime was no longer an isolated flash of consciousness, but a chapter in a much longer story. Did the first story we told perhaps create the first we, a collective identity so powerful it eventually necessitated the invention of the I? In the modern therapist's office, we see the power of this mirror at work. A patient, overwhelmed by a formless dread, is guided to find the word for it: abandonment. In that act of naming, the nebulous anxiety gains edges. It becomes something that can be observed, held at a distance, and understood. The emotion does not vanish, but it is now framed within the structure of language, a manageable part of the self's narrative, rather than a chaotic force threatening to dissolve it. This is language as an internal mirror, allowing us to see our own thoughts and feelings as objects of contemplation. We do not just feel, we know that we feel. We do not just think, we observe ourselves thinking. This metacognition, this loop of self-awareness, is arguably the birthplace of profound inner life. But if our inner world is only what we can name, what becomes of the feelings so deep and primal that they defy the boundaries of vocabulary, the sensations that language can only point toward with a trembling finger? Yet, a question lingers at the edge of this human-centric story, a soft call from the deep. Dolphins weave intricate songs with signature whistles that may function as names. Bonobo apes master symbolic lexicons, expressing desires and memories. Their communications are undeniably complex, rich with social nuance and meaning. Does this mean a pod of dolphins, chattering through the ocean, possesses a collective consciousness? Does a bonobo contemplating a symbol for banana experience a flicker of the same internal narrative that we do? Perhaps language is not the sole key to the kingdom of consciousness, but merely one of its most elegant expressions, a tool, not the craftsman itself. The existence of other sophisticated communication systems forces us to wonder, is our mirror made of glass, or is it merely a still, proud pool, reflecting only our own image and believing it to be the only one in the forest? What may truly distinguish our particular mirror is its unique capacity for abstraction and recursive storytelling. We do not just signal danger, we can tell the story of the last time danger came and speculate on its next possible arrival. We can weave narratives not just about what is, but about what was, what could be, and what should be. And in this endless telling and retelling, a singular character began to take center stage in the story of each life: the I. It was a character whose motives could be examined, whose past could be lamented, whose future could be planned. This was the monumental leap, the creation of the first self, not just a creature that lived, but a creature that knew it lived, a biological organism that had written a protagonist for its own existence. And from that moment, a new, peculiar, and often burdensome journey began. If the self is a story we tell, who is the teller, and who is the listener, in the quiet theater of our own minds? This nascent I, however, is not a birthright. A newborn infant exists in a state of pure, undifferentiated being, a universe of sensation with no center, no edges. There is no self, only experience. Then, over months, a dawning recognition occurs. The child begins to connect the feel of its own moving hand with the sight of it. It discovers agency. And finally, in the ultimate test of self-awareness, it is placed before a mirror. At first, it is just another fascinating object, another child in the glass. But there comes a moment, a cognitive revolution as profound as any in our species' history, when the child understands. The form in the reflection is times me, asterisk. This is my hand, my face, my body. The internal mirror of language has found its external counterpart, and the abstract concept of I snaps into focus, anchored to a physical form. One cannot help but wonder, when did our own species, in the long, slow dawn of its becoming, experience this same collective mirror stage? There was no literal glass, of course. Perhaps it was the still, dark surface of a watering hole, where a curious hominin, leaning down to drink, suddenly paused. The face looking back was not just a rival or an apparition, it was a recognition. The eyes in the water were its time's eyes. Or perhaps the first true mirror was the gaze of another. In the eyes of a companion, one sees oneself reflected as an object of their attention, a separate being with whom they share a history and a future. In that exchange of looks, a self is born, co-created in the space between two minds. Was the first I whispered not in solitude, but in the presence of a you? The evidence for this awakening is etched faintly in the archaeological record. It appears with the first personal adornments, a necklace of shells, a bracelet of animal teeth. Why decorate the body if there is no self to be seen, no identity to proclaim? This is not just art, it is a statement. I am the one who wears this. I am distinct. I have status. I belong to a group. I have an identity that can be seen. It echoes in the meticulous care of the first burials, where the dead are laid to rest, with tools, weapons, and flowers. This is more than hygiene or ritual. It is a profound narrative act. It says, "This was a time self***, a person whose story does not end with the last breath. We remember them. They were an I. The grave is a testament to a life that was known, from the inside, to be a life. This creation of the first self was our greatest liberation and our original burden. The animal lives its life, a perfect, unself-conscious expression of its nature. But the human, the animal that knows it is an animal, gains the ability to reflect, to choose, to regret, and to aspire. We became the narrators of our own lives, but in doing so, we also became the critics. The I is the seat of our joys, our loves, our triumphs. But it is also the source of our anxieties, our shame, our gnawing sense of inadequacy. We can now ask the most beautiful and terrifying of questions. Who am I? The animal simply times is asterisk. The human must times become asterisk. This is the double-edged gift of self-awareness. We were lifted out of the pure, immediate stream of being and given a vantage point on its banks. But from there, we can see the relentless flow of time carrying us toward a destination we can never truly know. Does the one who sees the current also feel the drag of the water more acutely? So we are left with this fragile, constructed, and utterly real entity, the first self, born somewhere in the interplay between a brain that can symbolize, a society that can reflect, and a world that can be named. It is the protagonist of our internal story, the face we see in the water, the name we whisper in the dark. It is the reason we can feel both profound loneliness and deep connection, the source of our art and our anguish. We built this mirror to see ourselves, and in its reflection, we found a world of meaning and a universe of questions. Having crafted this I and felt the weight of its solitary existence, what unspoken need then compelled us to reach across the void and try to touch another? The first light of consciousness is not a sudden sunrise, but a slow, dawning recognition in the mirror of a mind. Picture one 8-month-old child, standing unsteadily before a glass surface. An adult has discreetly painted a red dot on the toddler's forehead. The child, captivated by the reflection, reaches not toward the cool glass, but upward, toward its own skin. The small fingers find the mark. In that quiet, unspoken moment, a profound shift occurs. The child has not just seen an image, it has understood that the image is times itself asterisk. But what silent, intricate machinery whirred to life inside that developing brain to allow for such a monumental realization? What circuit closed? What map was drawn to create the very first I? Biologically, this moment of self-recognition is a symphony of neural development. It coincides with the maturation of specific regions in the prefrontal and parietal cortices. These are not mere processors of visual data. They are the cartographers of the self. They build a constantly updated map of the body, a neural representation of limbs, torso, and face in space. When the child sees the red dot in the mirror, this internal map is cross-referenced with the external image. A discrepancy is detected. The map says there is no red dot. The eyes say there is. The brain resolves the conflict not by dismissing the visual input, but by updating the map, by accepting the image as its own. It is a silent biological argument that concludes with the simplest, yet most complex, of verdicts. That is me. This is the primal layer of the self, a ghost woven from the loom of brain structure and bodily sensation. If we could dig into the deep strata of time, what fossilized echoes of this first I would we find? Archaeology offers no direct answers, only tantalizing fragments. From the cool, dark depths of caves dating back 30,000 years, we unearth not just tools for survival, but artifacts of identity. A mask, carved from a reindeer's skull, hints at the ability to adopt another persona, a concept impossible without a stable self to step away from. A small, stylized figurine, shaped with care from mammoth ivory, is more than a toy. It is an externalization, a projection of a human form. a sign that the maker could hold an image of a body, their body, in their mind. These are the whispers of a burgeoning self-consciousness, an interior world beginning to express itself in the exterior one. The eye was learning to make its mark, first in red ochre on a wall, then in the very culture it was creating. In our modern world, we wield the word I with casual, unthinking fluency. It is the most fundamental pronoun, the anchor of every story we tell. Yet, behind this single syllable lies an epic, multi-million-year journey. It is the history of billions of neurons, across countless generations, slowly learning to draw a boundary in the sand of existence, to separate the self from the other, the observer from the observed. We inherit this hard-won pronoun at the cradle, unaware of the ancient, neural struggles that forged it. We wear our sense of self as naturally as we wear our skin, seldom considering the intricate biological and cultural tailoring that made it fit. But then, a question emerges from the forest, a challenge to our human exclusivity. A chimpanzee, studied in a research facility, also passes the mirror test. After days of treating its reflection as a stranger, a moment of insight dawns. It uses the mirror to inspect parts of its own body it cannot otherwise see, to groom itself, to remove a mark. Other great apes, and even dolphins and elephants, have shown this capacity. So, what does this mean? Is the sacred I, the foundation of our philosophy and art, merely a sophisticated version of a cognitive tool shared with other beings? Is the mirror simply revealing a continuum of self-awareness, a gradient of consciousness where we occupy one point among many? The reflection in the glass becomes suddenly more crowded, more mysterious. Perhaps the true distinction, the subtle fork in the evolutionary path, lies not in the act of recognition itself, but in what we do with that knowledge. The human child does not merely see itself in the present moment, it begins to construct a self that stretches across time. It builds a self for tomorrow, for next year, for a future that exists only in the mind. This profound act of temporal self-creation seems to be intrinsically linked to another, uniquely potent human ability. It blossoms as we learn to do something no other species does with such cumulative, transformative fidelity. We learn to teach. And in the sharing of a skill, in the careful, deliberate passing of a spark, the individual I finds its purpose and its power, setting the stage for a different kind of fire altogether. For if the first I is a spark caught in the mirror of the mind, what happens when one such spark learns to intentionally ignite another? They were 8 years old, left in the dappled light of the forest. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, was not a threat but a classroom. They were not merely surviving the chill of the approaching evening. They were collaborating, a small council of children, teaching one another the ancient art of conjuring flame. Small hands gathered tinder-dry moss, brittle twigs, while others carefully arranged stones into a cradle for the coming fire. There was no single leader, no appointed teacher. Knowledge flowed between them, a shared current of intuition and remembered fragments of instruction. When the first spark, born from a frantic scrape of stone, finally caught and bloomed into a fragile, flickering tongue, it illuminated more than their faces. It revealed a profound, often forgotten truth. Knowledge does not reside solely within a single mind. It lives in the space between us, passed like a torch from one set of hands to another, a collective inheritance that predates history itself. This childhood, this extended period of vulnerability, is not a biological flaw but our greatest evolutionary advantage. While the young of other species are quick to flee the nest or fend for themselves, human children remain dependent for years, their brains unfinished, their minds soft clay. This delay is the crucible of culture. Within it, the neural pathways are not just hardened by genetics, but sculpted by experience, by watching, imitating, and absorbing the behaviors of those around them. A child does not learn a language from a manual. They soak it in from the cadence of a lullaby, the rhythm of daily conversation. They learn not just the word for fire, but the social dance of building it together, the shared responsibility, the patience, the unspoken rules of cooperation. This social learning is the prerequisite for everything we call civilization. It transforms the individual brain into a node in a vast, intergenerational network. What is this slow-burning fuse of childhood, if not nature's way of giving culture the time it needs to take root? The evidence of this ancient curriculum is etched not on chalkboards, but on ochre and bone. Deep within the Blombos cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a toolkit, a kind of Paleolithic artist's studio. There were abalone shells for mixing paint, ochre crayons, and bone fragments. But the most telling clues were the markings. On some pieces of bone, experts found intricate, cross-hatched engravings. Alongside them were other bones with similar, but fainter, more hesitant, and clumsier scratches. The conclusion is inescapable. This was a master and an apprentice. An adult, their mind filled with symbolic meaning and technical skill, guiding the hand of a child. The child was not just learning to make a mark, they were learning to see the world as their teacher saw it, to imbue a simple line with meaning, to participate in a tradition. They were being taught how to hold a story in their hands and carve it into existence. Were these first classrooms dark and silent, or filled with the same patient explanations and clumsy, hopeful attempts we would recognize today? This process of absorption continues, unabated, in the modern world. A child in a classroom does not simply memorize facts about the planets. They absorb a way of thinking. They learn the rhythm of a question and its answer, the thrill of a hypothesis proven, the shared wonder of a scientific discovery. They learn to feel pride in a well-solved equation and to tell the story of their learning to others. Their individual consciousness, their unique sense of I, does not spring forth fully formed from a vacuum. It is born from a social process, woven from the threads of countless conversations, shared glances, and collaborative fires built in the forests of their youth. The self is a story we begin to tell ourselves, using the language, the logic, and the narratives first given to us by others. So, is our most personal identity merely a tapestry woven from the voices of everyone we have ever known? Yet, we are not the only species that teaches. A dolphin mother will demonstrate how to tear a sponge from the ocean floor and use it to probe the sand for hidden fish, a technique her calf will painstakingly mimic. A young chimpanzee will watch its mother skillfully wield a stick to fish for termites, then pick up a twig and try for itself. These are undeniable acts of teaching, complex and intelligent. They ensure the survival of crucial skills. But is this the same as what happened in the Blombos cave or around the children's fire? Is the transmission of a physical technique, no matter how clever, the same as the creation of a tradition? The mother dolphin teaches her calf how times to eat, but does she teach it why the sponge is used, or tell it a story about the first dolphin who ever thought of it? Does the skill die with the individual, or does it become a permanent, evolving thread in the cultural fabric of the pod? Perhaps the difference, the subtle chasm that separates our collective mind from theirs, lies not in the action, but in the story that wraps around it. Our ancestors did not just transmit the motion for creating fire, they transmitted the myth of the god who stole it, the cautionary tale of the forest it burned, the song to sing as the flames grew. They passed down not just the technique of carving an ochre pattern, but the belief that the pattern held power, that it connected them to the spirit of the antelope they hoped to hunt. In doing so, they were not just teaching a skill, they were building a shared reality. They were creating a context in which the knowledge lived and breathed and meant something more than mere utility. From this fertile ground, a new kind of consciousness emerged, one that was no longer confined to the solitary skull. It was a distributed consciousness, a we, that was greater than the sum of its eyes. It was a flame passed from mind to mind, each generation adding its own fuel, so that the light never went out. But if consciousness can truly be a collective phenomenon, a shared fire burning across millennia, then where does the individual self end and the tribe begin? And if a single mind can hold a flame, what becomes possible when 1,000 minds focus on the same spark? A child of the 21st century sits, bathed in the cool light of a screen. They learn of spinning planets and ancient wars, of gods who strode the earth millennia before their parents were born. They have never felt the chill of an ice age or the heat of a forge, yet they know asterisk. They carry within them the fears, the wonders, the accumulated questions of countless generations. How is this possible? How does an inner world, a flicker of subjective experience, leap across the chasms of time and space to find a home in another? Is consciousness not a solitary flame, but something that can be shared, passed along like a story whispered from one mind to the next, until it becomes the very air we breathe? We begin with biology, with the wet, organic hardware of our shared existence. At the core of human connection lies a silent, profound ability, the theory of mind. It is the innate, almost magical capacity to look into another's eyes and understand that behind them lies a universe as rich and complex as our own, a universe of private joys, hidden pains, and unique perspectives. This is not mere empathy. It is the foundational architecture for all complex communication. It is the bridge upon which consciousness first tentatively steps. When a mother soothes her crying infant, she is not just responding to a sound, she is intuiting a state of being: fear, discomfort, longing. She is, in that moment, allowing her own consciousness to be shaped by the perceived consciousness of another. This biological cradle, this neural mirroring, is the first and most intimate form of transmission. But if this bridge exists between two people, could it not, over generations, be woven into a sprawling network? Does our very wiring predispose us to become a collective thinking entity? The evidence of this ancient network is etched not in genes, but in stone and ochre. Archaeology offers us glimpses into a time when this shared consciousness first began to paint itself onto the world. 40,000 years ago, across the vast and unconnected landscapes of Europe and Asia, a curious phenomenon emerged. In deep, silent caves, human hands much like our own, stenciled their outlines on rock walls. They painted creatures of power and grace: bison, horses, mammoths. But more strikingly, they began to depict hybrid beings, part human, part animal. The so-called Lion Man of Germany, a figure carved from mammoth ivory, is not a portrait of anything that ever walked the earth. It is a concept. It is a dream given form. The appearance of such similar symbolic thought across continents suggests that our ancestors were not merely sharing better ways to chip a flint. They were sharing a world view. They were collectively building a reality populated by spirits and forces, a narrative that gave meaning to the brutal, beautiful puzzle of existence. This was the birth of culture, not as entertainment, but as a shared mental landscape. Were these caves the first cathedrals, the first theaters, where the inner world of consciousness first learned to project itself outward, creating a reality so compelling that others could step inside and inhabit it? This ancient impulse to project and share has, in our modern age, exploded into a dizzying symphony of interconnected thought. Our social networks, our systems of education, our sprawling pop culture, these are the new caves, the new campfires. A single idea, a meme, a melody, a revolutionary thought born in one mind can now ripple across the globe in seconds, influencing, inspiring, or manipulating millions. A political movement galvanizes a nation. A work of fiction shapes the moral compass of a generation. A viral video can, for a moment, unite the world in a shared feeling of awe or outrage. This is consciousness operating at a scale our ancestors could never have imagined. It feels like a collective mind, a hive spirit, where individual neurons are the 7 billion souls of humanity, firing in a complex, often chaotic, dance. The boundary between my thoughts and your thoughts, between my consciousness and the cultural zeitgeist, becomes blurred, porous. Are we truly individuals, or are we temporary vessels for a river of thought that began long before us and will continue long after we are gone? Yet, a sobering counterpoint emerges from the very technology that enables this global connection. A computer can replicate a terabyte of data with flawless precision. It can store every word of a love letter, every pixel of a masterpiece, every note of a funeral dirge. It can transmit this information across the planet, and another computer can receive it, bit for bit, perfectly. But does the receiving computer times the longing in the letter? Does it perceive the sorrow in the music? The transmission of information, no matter how vast or complex, is not the same as the transmission of consciousness. Information is the skeleton, consciousness is the life that animates it. We can send the blueprint for an emotion, the map of an experience, but we cannot send the experience itself. The recipient must use that blueprint to reconstruct the feeling within the private workshop of their own mind. So, what is the missing ingredient? What alchemy transforms cold data into warm, lived understanding? Perhaps the true transmission of consciousness occurs only when information is imbued with the fire of symbolism. It is not the fact, but the times the fact is told the image, the rhythm of the voice, the shared emotion that vibrates beneath the words. A dry recitation of a battle's date is data. A poet's description of the fear in a young soldier's eyes as he charges is an invitation to consciousness. It asks you to build that feeling within yourself, to momentarily inhabit that reality. Our species mastered this art of symbolic invitation. We learned to weave narratives so potent they could bridge the gap between isolated selves. But this capacity, this particular flavor of dreaming, may not have been a universal gift bestowed upon all intelligent hominins. This realization leads us to the silent, haunting question posed by our ancient cousins, whose bones lie beside our own in the deep strata of the earth. They walked the same lands, faced the same winters, and possessed brains that rivaled, and sometimes exceeded, our own in size. They buried their dead with care. They crafted sophisticated tools. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet, they left behind no cave galleries bursting with color, no tiny figurines of goddesses, no lion men carved from ivory. They were intelligent, capable, and undoubtedly conscious. But did their consciousness burn with the same kind of inner fire? Did they, too, lie awake under the Pleistocene stars and feel the urge to tell a story, to paint a dream, to share not just a world, but a soul? Why, then, did the Neanderthals not dream in the same way? They had brains larger than our own. They crafted tools with a practiced hand, their fingers knowing the heft of stone and the promise of a sharp edge. They buried their dead, placing them in the earth with a care that whispers of something more than mere instinct. They were the Neanderthals, our stout, robust cousins, who weathered the ice ages of Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, they left behind no galleries, no ochre-stained walls alive with the ghosts of aurochs and mammoths, no tiny carved figurines of ivory or bone, no stories. We stand in their caves, our flashlight beams sweeping across empty limestone canvases, and we are met with a profound and echoing silence. It is a silence that begs a question far deeper than one of mere cultural difference. They possessed intelligence, that much is clear, but did they possess an inner world? Did the Neanderthal mind, in its quiet, subterranean existence, ever dream? The architecture of their brains offers the first, tantalizing clue. A Neanderthal skull housed a cavern of thought that, in sheer volume, surpassed our own. But intelligence is not just a matter of cubic centimeters. It is in the wiring, the intricate dance of connections. The modern human brain is a metropolis of neurons, with sprawling superhighways linking distant regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex, the seat of abstract thought, future planning, and self-reflection. This connectome is our neural internet, allowing for a dizzying crosstalk of ideas. The Neanderthal brain, some neuroscientists suggest, may have been organized differently. Perhaps it was a collection of powerful, isolated towns, each brilliant at its specific task, tool-making, navigation, social bonding, but lacking the high-bandwidth infrastructure for those towns to merge their voices into a single, symphonic narrative. They could think, but could they think about thinking? They could see a bison, but could they see the idea times of a bison and feel compelled to capture its essence, not just its substance, upon a wall? The archaeological record is a library of fragments, and its story is one of stark contrast. We find their hearths, their Mousterian spear points, their burials, a Neanderthal grave at Shanidar Cave, sprinkled with pollen, hints at a ritual, a farewell painted with flowers. They occasionally collected feathers, claws, and pigments, perhaps for personal adornment. These are not the actions of automatons. They speak of a rich social and emotional life, of grief, of a sense of aesthetics. But then we look to our own ancestors, the Homo sapiens who arrived in Europe and in a breathtakingly short span of time left an indelible mark of symbolism. They painted, they carved, they invented music, they sewed beads onto clothing, each bead a tiny, hard-won testament to an identity, a status, a story. The Neanderthal record holds almost none of this. It is as if their consciousness was rooted firmly in the tangible, the immediate, the what is. Ours, it seems, became obsessed with the what could be, the what it means, and the what was. This is the modern human condition, a peculiar and powerful software update to the mind. We are the creatures who can lie, who can imagine a future that does not yet exist, who can feel a pang of empathy for a fictional character in a story. We live, perpetually, in a world inside our heads, a simulated reality running parallel to the one our bodies inhabit. We rehearse conversations, dread potential failures, and savor anticipated joys. This internal theater allows for art, for religion, for science. It allows us to ask, why? Did the Neanderthals lack this theater? Was their experience of reality one of pure, unmediated sensation, a continuous, vivid present without the ghostly voice of a narrator? Were they, in a sense, fully present in their world in a way we can scarcely remember? But just as we begin to draw this clean, tragic line between their concrete existence and our abstract one, the Earth offers a contradiction. Deep in the darkness of Bruniquel Cave in France, far from any natural light, lies a mysterious construction. Broken stalagmites have been arranged into large, deliberate circles, some showing signs of fire. This is not a dwelling. It is not a practical tool. It was built by Neanderthals over 175,000 years ago. What was its purpose? A meeting place? A ceremonial site? A calendar tracking the slow turn of the seasons? It feels, undeniably, like a symbol, a gesture towards something beyond mere survival. It is a single, monumental question mark carved into the cave floor, forcing us to reconsider our assumptions. Perhaps they were not devoid of symbolic thought, but simply expressed it in ways that are, to us, alien and ephemeral. Their dreams might have been woven from the sounds of the wind and the scent of wet earth, leaving no fossil trace. Is our search for their consciousness doomed because we are looking for our own reflection in their silent pools? The question of whether Neanderthals dreamed is, ultimately, a mirror we hold up to ourselves. Their lineage faded, absorbed or replaced by ours. Homo sapiens, with its chattering, storytelling, future-obsessed mind, prevailed. We have used this mind to pierce the atom, to map the genome, to send our voices across the globe in an instant. We have used it to compose concertos and write constitutions. Our journey has been an ever-deepening dive into the interior cosmos of our own consciousness. We have become the masters of the world inside our heads. But what is the price of this ticket? To be the only creature that knows, with chilling certainty, its own mortality? To be the only one that can feel loneliness in a crowd, that can be haunted by a past mistake or paralyzed by a future fear? Our art, our music, our religions, are they not, in part, magnificent attempts to build a fire in this vast, internal darkness, to shout into the cavern of our own minds just to hear an echo and know we are not alone? The Neanderthal, if they lived in a quieter, more immediate world, may have been spared this particular existential chill. They were of their world, while we have become spectators of ours, forever separated by the thin, unbreakable pain of our own self-awareness. We conquered the globe because we could dream. But does the dreamer, in the end, ever truly wake up? And so we find ourselves, the sole survivors of our genus, surrounded by 7 billion of our own kind, yet often feeling a solitude so profound it seems to echo back to the very dawn of our consciousness. This awareness, this glorious burden, is not always a blessing. It is the root of our anxiety, the source of our shame, the architect of our regrets. It shows us not only what is, but the agonizing chasm between what is and what should be. We are the only animals that blush, that need to lie to ourselves to get through the day, that are haunted by the ghosts of our own potential. From this fertile, troubled soil, our greatest defenses sprang. We began to sing, to hum melodies that gave shape to a sadness that had no name. We began to daub paint on rock, not just to record the animal, but to capture its spirit, to assert some control over the chaotic, frightening world outside. We began to tell stories. Around the fire, we wove narratives of heroes and monsters, of gods and creation, imposing order on the chaos of existence. These stories were the first maps of our inner turmoil. They told us that the thunder was not just noise, but the anger of a god, that death was not just an end, but a journey to another world. We created religion not merely as a set of rules, but as a cosmic story in which we played a part, a narrative to soothe the terror of our own insignificance. These were not frivolous inventions. They were life support systems for a mind that had become too aware of its own fragile, temporary nature. The cave painting was a spell against the dark. The epic poem was a shared dream that bound a tribe together against the cold indifference of the universe. The prayer was a conversation with the silence inside our own heads, a way to feel heard, to feel connected to something larger than our own solitary selves. We built cathedrals of stone and symphonies of sound to house the homelessness we felt within our own minds. We crafted identities, ideologies, and entire civilizations as elaborate bulwarks against the creeping dread of meaninglessness. This is the grand, tragic paradox of being human. The very thing that made us the dominant species, our hyper-developed, self-referential consciousness, is the very thing that threatens to undo us. It is the source of our genius and our madness. We are the only creatures who need therapy, who require art, who seek salvation. We are forever trying to escape the prison of our own minds, using the very tools that built the prison in the first place. We tell ourselves stories to keep from going insane amidst the crowd, to feel a sense of belonging even as we remain, fundamentally, isolated islands of perception. Our inner world is both our sanctuary and our cage. We have filled the silence they left behind with a cacophony of our own, making a beautiful, desperate, and endless noise. But in our quietest moments, when the stories fade and the music stops, we are left with the same fundamental solitude that has haunted us since we first became aware of it. We have built entire civilizations to answer a single, silent scream from within. But what if the silence was the answer all along? In the soft, flickering firelight of a hunter-gatherer camp, an old man sits apart. The laughter and shared stories of the tribe are a warm, buzzing hum just a few meters away, yet he occupies a space that feels immeasurably distant. No one has banished him. There are no harsh words or formal exiles. His separation is quieter, more profound. It is a choice, or perhaps the simple gravitational pull of a private world. This scene, etched in the amber of a prehistoric evening, poses a question that would take millennia to articulate. Does the very consciousness that allows us to feel connection also be the architect of our deepest solitude? The faculty that lets us see ourselves in others might be the same one that builds the invisible walls between us. This internal landscape, the realm of self-awareness, is not a sudden miracle, but a slow-blooming biological flower. At its most fundamental layer lies what science calls self-monitoring, a relentless internal feedback loop. It is the capacity to not just feel hunger, but to remember the shame of taking too much from the shared kill. It is the ability to observe the subtle shift in a companion's posture and interpret it as disapproval, or to replay a clumsy moment in the hunt, cringing at the memory. This is the double-edged sword of our neurology, the same machinery that allows for empathy, for anticipating the needs of a child or an elder, also renders us exquisitely vulnerable. It paints our social world in vibrant colors of approval and rejection, binding the tribe together with invisible threads of understood rules and shared judgments. But for the individual, this constant, internal commentary can become a chorus of isolation. Is the price of belonging a perpetual, low-grade anxiety about our place within it? The silent testimony of the earth seems to offer a contradictory answer. Archaeologists, brushing the dust from ancient grave sites, find evidence of profound connection. A skeleton, its bones withered by a long-term illness, buried with care and ochre dust, speaks of a community that valued its members beyond their utility. An old woman, her teeth worn to the gums, was fed and cared for. She was not left behind. This is the cradle of humanity, the compassionate hand that argues against inherent loneliness. Yet, in the same sedimentary layers, we find other hints. A burial placed far from the others, a set of artifacts that suggests a life lived on the periphery. These solitary figures whisper that the mood of a society, its capacity for inclusion and exclusion, is as ancient as the species itself. Could the old man by the fire have been a recurring archetype? A soul whose inner world was too vast or too quiet for the collective to fully embrace? Fast forward through centuries, and the paradox only deepens. We now live in cities of 10 million souls, a density our ancestors could not have dreamed of. We are surrounded, jostled, and connected by a digital web of staggering complexity. Yet, the modern lament is a universal whisper. No one truly knows me. Consciousness has gifted us a rich, intricate interior life, a novel only we can read. But that same novel is written in a private language, one that can never be fully translated for another. We build bridges of words and gestures, but do we ever truly cross into another's subjective universe? Or do we merely meet on the sturdy, yet superficial, scaffolding of shared experience, forever peering into the unique, unreachable depths within each person? Perhaps, a dissenting voice suggests, this particular flavor of loneliness is not the fault of consciousness at all. It is a modern malaise, a symptom of our fragmented societies. The hunter-gatherer, their identity woven inextricably into the fabric of the tribe, their survival dependent on every member, might not have had the luxury or the curse of feeling so profoundly alone. Their self-reflection may have been a communal pool, not a private well. Their consciousness was oriented outward, toward the group, the herd, the weather, the spirits of the land. The modern self, by contrast, is a fortress, its walls raised high by individualism and the sheer scale of human numbers. Is our existential solitude, then, not a feature of the human mind, but a design flaw of the world we have built around it? Yet, whether the product of ancient neurology or modern fragmentation, the phenomenon remains. And it is this very state of being, the act of reflecting upon oneself as a distinct entity within the collective, that has always sent humanity searching for answers. The search does not begin in a laboratory. It begins in the dark, with a story. It is the human impulse to look at the old man by the fire and not just see an outcast, but to see a mirror. To project his solitude onto the stars and call it a god's exile. To hear his silence in the wind and name it a spirit's lament. The problem of the self, adrift in a sea of other selves, demanded a language more fluid than fact. It demanded symbol and myth. For what is a myth, if not a shared dream, an attempt to build a communal home for our most private and inexpressible wonders? This internal witness, this silent observer we carry behind our eyes, must have a physical address. It must reside somewhere in the wet, gray matter of the brain, a structure built from neurons and synapses. We call it the mind, but its foundations are resolutely biological. What intricate architecture gives rise to this phantom? What is the machinery of self? Consider the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped curl deep within the temporal lobe. It is the librarian of our personal history, the meticulous archivist of the episodic. It does not simply store facts. It preserves the rich, sensory tapestry of a specific moment, the chill of the rain on your skin that afternoon, the exact timbre of a forgotten laugh, the complex emotion of a farewell at a train station. Without it, we are stranded in a perpetual, featureless present. But is memory itself consciousness? Or is it merely the raw material, the quarry from which the self is carved? The hippocampus provides the footage, the endless reels of a life. recorded, but who is the editor in the cutting room, splicing these fragments into the continuous, flowing narrative we call me? Then there is the prefrontal cortex, the looming brow of the brain, the seat of executive function. This is the conductor of the neural orchestra, the planner, the inhibitor of impulses. It is what allows you to weigh a decision, to imagine the future consequences of a present action, to see yourself not just as you are, but as you could be. It builds the model of the self as agent, the protagonist of your story. It is the source of judgment, both of the world and, most harshly, of oneself. But if the prefrontal cortex is the conductor, is it also the composer? Does it generate the symphony of self, or does it merely organize the themes provided by older, more primal parts of the brain? Is our sophisticated self-awareness just an evolved layer of management, supervising a much older, wilder animal? Perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies not in a single structure, but in a network, the default mode network. This is the brain's background hum, a constellation of regions that light up with activity precisely when we are not times focused on an external task. When we daydream, when we reminisce, when we worry about a social interaction, when we ponder our place in the universe, this is when the default mode network ignites. It is the physiological correlate of the mind at rest with itself, the engine of self-referential thought. It weaves together memories from the hippocampus, projections from the prefrontal cortex, and emotional color from the limbic system into the seamless, ongoing story of the self. It is the neural substrate for the old man's quiet reverie by the fire. But here lies the paradox. This network is most active when we are disengaged from the present, physical world. Does this mean that the very essence of self-awareness is, by its nature, a form of withdrawal? That to know oneself, one must first turn away from the other? We can map these regions, trace their connections, and observe their metabolic dance. We can see the physical cradle of introspection. Yet, knowing the geography of the brain does not explain the weather of the mind. We can locate the organs of memory and foresight, but how do these biological processes coalesce into the unified, subjective experience of being? The hardware is laid bare, but the software, the ghost, remains elusive. If the self is merely the sum of these parts, a story told by a chorus of neurons, then who is listening? You are sitting perfectly still, your eyes closed. The world of light and color, of shapes and immediate forms, has vanished. Yet, you are not in darkness. A landscape unfolds behind your eyelids, a beach from a childhood vacation, the face of a loved one who is far away, the blueprint of a project you haven't yet begun. You are seeing, but not with your eyes. So, who is the observer in the theater of your mind? Who is the one looking? This internal seer, this silent witness, is perhaps the most intimate and elusive part of our being. It is the seat of imagination, the canvas for memory, the quiet chamber of self-reflection. For a long time, this was the domain of poets and philosophers, a ghost in the machine that science could not locate. But now, we are beginning to map its geography. Deep within the folded cortex of the brain, a particular network of regions hums with activity when we are at rest. They call it the default mode network. When you are not focused on an external task, when you are daydreaming on a train, replaying a conversation, or simply letting your mind wander, this is the constellation of neurons that lights up. It is the biological cradle for our internal narrative, the engine of our personal identity. It weaves together fragments of the past, possibilities of the future, and a constant, running commentary on the self. It is the physiological foundation for the one who looks within. This capacity to journey inward is not a new invention of the modern human brain. We can find its earliest signatures not in textbooks, but on stone. In the deepest, most silent chambers of ancient caves, our ancestors left more than just handprints and depictions of prey. They left abstract patterns, ladders, zigzags, nested curves, repeating dots. These are not images of anything that existed in their tangible world. They are echoes of something seen within. Were they the first maps of trance states, the visual remnants of dreams? or simply the irresistible human urge to externalize an internal pattern, to prove that the mind could generate its own reality independent of the immediate senses. These cryptic symbols suggest that the internal eye was open and gazing long before we had the words to describe its visions. It is a haunting thought. In the flickering firelight, surrounded by the stark necessities of survival, a human was just as likely to be contemplating a geometric pattern blooming in their mind's eye as they were planning their next hunt. In our modern age, we have systematized this inner vision. We have given it names and harnessed its power. Athletes use visualization therapy to meticulously rehearse every movement of a perfect performance, firing the same neural pathways as if they were physically executing the action. Therapists guide patients to confront fears in the safe space of their imagination, to rewrite traumatic narratives from the inside out. And in the quiet of our own homes, we maintain a constant internal dialogue through journals and meditation, sorting through the images, voices, and emotions that constitute our private world. We are in ceaseless conversation with ourselves, using the language of the internal eye to understand who we are. We have learned to cultivate this inner landscape, to tend to it like a garden, believing that its clarity is the key to our sanity and our success. But is this internal witness, this cherished eye that observes our thoughts, a unique and necessary pinnacle of consciousness? Or is it merely one possible configuration of a complex nervous system, a fascinating but accidental byproduct? Consider the octopus, a creature with a brain distributed throughout its body, its arms possessing a startling degree of autonomous intelligence. It can solve puzzles, mimic its environment, and exhibit curiosity, all without a single, centralized seat of consciousness as we understand it. Or the dolphin, which sleeps with one hemisphere of its brain at a time, its mind never fully switching off, its sense of self perhaps more fluid, more integrated with the pod and the ocean's song than with an internal narrator. Their intelligence is profound, yet it seems to lack the constant, self-referential commentary that defines our human experience. Does the octopus get lost in reverie about its past? Does the dolphin fret about its social standing? It seems unlikely. So, is our internal eye so vivid and all-consuming to us just a particularly loud and chatty passenger on the journey of life, rather than the driver of the vehicle? Whether a glorious accident or an essential function, this capacity to see within has granted us a power that defines our species, the power to remember. We do not merely react to the present, we are haunted by the past and drawn toward the future. Our internal eye is a time machine, and its most precious, most treacherous fuel is memory. It is the loom on which the tapestry of our identity is woven, thread by thread, experience by experience. We use this ability to build a continuous story of who we are, a narrative that stretches from our first fragmented childhood moments to the person reading these words now. This story feels like the bedrock of our consciousness, the unshakable truth of our existence. But what if this bedrock is not nearly as solid as it feels? What if the very memory we rely on to construct ourself is not a flawless recording, but a shimmering, shifting mirage? The internal eye gazes into the past, but can we ever truly trust what it sees? And so we arrive at memory, the sweet trap. Consciousness walks hand in hand with the ability to record our days, to build a library of the self. It is the gift that allows us to learn, to love, to hold on to the face of a loved one long after they are gone. Yet, this gift has a curious, almost cruel, bias. Why is it that a single moment of searing embarrassment from decades ago can replay with such vivid, cringe-inducing clarity, while 100 peaceful, sun-drenched afternoons blend into a pleasant, but indistinct, blur? Why does the sting of a criticism linger long after the warmth of a compliment has faded? Our memory, it seems, is not an impartial historian. It is a storyteller with a taste for drama, a curator who preferentially archives our pains and fears. We walk through the present, but we are never truly free from the past. A scent, a few notes of a song, the quality of the light at a certain hour, and a ghost is summoned. A forgotten anxiety rises, an old joy aches with its absence, a past failure whispers its warnings into a new opportunity. The internal eye does not just see the past, it is haunted by it. The memories we store are not inert files. They are living, breathing entities that color our perceptions, shape our decisions, and often hold our present selves hostage to the wounds and wonders of who we once were. We believe we are moving forward in a straight line, but we are constantly circling back, pulled by the gravity of what has been. This is the paradox of memory. It is the foundation of our identity, the very thing that makes us a coherent person across time. And yet, it is also a prison of sorts. We are the curators of our own museum of pain and pleasure, but we did not design the museum's rules of acquisition. We are left with a collection that is simultaneously ours and yet strangely alien, a narrative that feels absolute but is, in truth, a fragile and ever-edited draft. So we must ask, if the self is built upon the shifting sands of memory, then what, if anything, remains truly solid when the tide of time recedes? The old man sits in his chair, the same one he's had for 40 years. The late afternoon sun slants through the window, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny, forgotten stars. He is not here, not really. He is 30 years in the past, watching his wife laugh in this very room, the sound a melody that once filled every corner of his world. The memory is so vivid, so tangible, that his hand twitches with the ghost of her touch. And then, the tears come. A silent, profound grief for a woman gone 3 decades, for a moment lost to the relentless river of time. Why does the human heart cling so desperately to these echoes? Why can we not simply let the memory go when its only gift is a fresh encounter with loss? This ache is not merely a flaw of sentiment, it is written into the very fabric of our biology. Deep within the brain, 2 ancient structures perform a silent, continuous duet. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped curator, tirelessly files away the facts of our lives, the where, the when, the who. It lays down the neural pathways that become the roads back to our past. And then there is the amygdala, the almond-shaped keeper of emotion. When the hippocampus opens a file, the amygdala floods the system, not with a sterile record, but with the full, sensory tsunami of the original moment. The salt of a long-ago sea, the crushing weight of a first heartbreak, the specific warmth of a mother's hand. We do not just remember, we re-feel. This is the brain's cruel and beautiful magic. It does not distinguish between the physiological reality of the present and the vivid recollection of the past. Is this neural partnership a gift of continuity, or a biological trap that ensures we can never truly be free of what we have lived? Long before we understood neurons, we understood the need to remember. In shadowy caves and on ancient burial mounds, our ancestors left proof of this obsession. They did not merely dispose of their dead, they laid them to rest with tools, ornaments, and ochre dust, sending them into the next world armed with the memories of this one. A carved figurine, a shell necklace in a grave, these were not just objects, they were anchors. They were the first stories, told not with words but with placement and care, a desperate, beautiful attempt to say, asterisk, this person was. This life mattered. Do not forget. Asterisk, memory, for them, was a social covenant, a thread connecting the community to its past and its future. It was never just about individual recall, it was about collective narrative. When we gather at a graveside today, are we not performing the same primordial ritual, stitching the departed into the ongoing story of us, fearing that to forget is to commit a second final death? This narrative becomes the bedrock of the self. In the modern world, we have built an entire philosophy of identity upon it. I am is the sum of I have been. Our personalities, our fears, our capacities for love and for cruelty are sculpted by the accumulated memories of our experiences. They are the invisible architects of our present. Yet, this same mechanism has a devastating twin. For the soldier who cannot escape the sound of a single explosion, the memory does not fade into the past, it invades the present. In post-traumatic stress disorder, The hippocampus and amygdala are not gentle collaborators but vicious jailers, forcing the individual to relive a horror on an endless, brutal loop. The very system that grants us a coherent self can also shatter that self from the inside. So, is memory the foundation of our identity, or is it the prison from which we may never be paroled? This question becomes even more unsettling when we confront the most intimate of betrayals. Memory is a liar. It is not a high-fidelity recording. It is a reconstruction, a story we tell ourselves each time we recall an event, and with each telling, the story changes. Studies show that memories are easily contaminated by suggestion, distorted by time, and reshaped by our subsequent emotions and beliefs. We confidently recall details that never existed, we insert ourselves into scenes we never witnessed, and we polish painful moments into smoother, more palatable versions. A childhood birthday party, remembered as a golden afternoon of laughter and cake, might, in a forgotten photograph, show a child on the verge of tears, overshadowed by a sibling. Which version is the truth? If our most cherished recollections are merely plausible fictions, narratives edited by the unseen hand of our present needs, then what, precisely, are we clinging to with such desperate tenderness? Is the old man crying for his wife, or for a beautifully crafted ghost? Perhaps the truth of memory lies not in its accuracy, but in its power. It is the loom on which we weave the tapestry of our perceived reality. It informs our choices, our loves, our prejudices. It paints the world in the colors of our past joys and sorrows. It is the sweet, inescapable trap that binds us to our humanity, to our losses, and to each other. And when the weight of this remembered world becomes too heavy, when the line between the real and the recalled begins to blur, we close our eyes. The conscious mind, that relentless curator of the past, finally rests its weary hands. But in the darkness, another faculty stirs, one even more elusive and unbound. If memory is the museum of the self, then what is the world we visit when the museum is closed and the guards are asleep? What ancient, wordless stories are we telling ourselves in the silent, boundless theater of the night? The child sleeps, curled in the red earth dust, the fire's embers painting his small face with a flickering, dying light. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and the deep, rhythmic breathing of the tribe. In the dark theater of his mind, a great elk runs. It is no ordinary beast. Its antlers are a leafless forest, its hooves thunder without sound, and its eyes hold the cold, ancient light of stars. It moves through a landscape that is and is not the one outside the cave, a place of impossible geography and fluid time. The next morning he stirs. With halting words and clumsy hands, he paints the vision in the air before his people. He speaks of the giant elk. They listen, and they nod. They understand. In that moment, across the gulf of millennia, we might be witnessing the first fragile stirring of a new kind of awareness. Not just consciousness of the present, but consciousness of the times elsewhere asterisk. The dream, perhaps, was the first territory of the truly human mind. To understand this nocturnal inheritance, we must first descend into its biological cradle. The dream does not arrive from some mystical ether. It is born from the intricate electrical storm of the REM sleep cycle. Here, the body lies in paralyzed stillness, a vessel becalmed, but the brain is a furnace stoked to a furious blaze. Neurons fire in chaotic, beautiful patterns, stitching together fragments of memory, sensation, and fear. For humans, this process is uniquely elaborate. Our dreams are not mere replays. They are symbolic, self-referential narratives. We are not just in the dream, we watch ourselves within it. We argue with versions of our past, we flee from monsters that are clearly manifestations of our anxieties, and we sometimes solve problems that daylight logic could not untangle. This act of weaving a coherent, if bizarre story from the raw data of our lives seems a profound leap. It is the mind, talking to itself in a language of metaphor. But if this is the biological machinery, is the experience itself merely a random byproduct of a brain in maintenance mode, or is it the very crucible where our sense of self is forged? Long before neuroscience, our ancestors had their own maps for this inner wilderness. The archaeological record whispers of a time when the dream was not a private neurological event, but a communal, sacred reality. In the deep, echoing silence of the Chauvet cave, alongside the majestic, breathing forms of painted horses and lions, we find traces of this belief. These were not mere galleries, they were likely portals. Shamans or vision seekers would retreat into these womb-like chambers, perhaps aided by rituals or fasting, to descend into the dream world. They went to meet the gods, to speak with the spirits of the animals they hunted, to bring back wisdom for the tribe. The dream was a crack in the world, a place where the veil between the mundane and the divine grew thin. A message from a god or an ancestor, delivered in a dream, carried the weight of absolute truth. It dictated migrations, healed the sick, and started wars. In this view, the dream was not a byproduct of consciousness, but its primary, most authentic state, a direct line to a larger, animating reality. So, which is it? A sacred bridge to the divine, or the brain's lonely, magnificent homework? The modern lens, polished by the work of Freud and Jung, offers a different, yet equally profound, interpretation. Here, the dream becomes the royal road to the unconscious. It is the stage where repressed emotions, unacknowledged desires, and forgotten traumas don their costumes and play their parts. The mind, in its wisdom, translates our raw, often unbearable psychic pain into symbols we can better endure. The terror of a looming deadline becomes a tidal wave. The guilt of a harsh word becomes a pursuing shadow. We dream to process, to heal, to understand the hidden contours of our own selves. This act of introspection, of turning the gaze inward to dissect the strange narratives we author in our sleep, seems a uniquely human form of high-wire consciousness. It is an act of self-archaeology. But does this quest for self-knowledge through dreams make us unique, or simply more verbose in our self-obsession? A complication stirs in the corner of the room, in the form of a sleeping cat. Its whiskers twitch, its paws paddle the air in a silent, frantic run. A dog, asleep by the hearth, may whimper and growl at some phantom squirrel. Laboratory studies show that rats, too, experience REM sleep, their brains replaying the day's maze runs, optimizing their paths. If the biological substrate of dreaming is so widespread across the animal kingdom, then the dream itself cannot be the sole property of humanity. It is an ancient, shared inheritance, a cognitive tool that predates us by millions of years. The cats dream of the chase, the rats dream of the maze. They are functional, procedural, rooted in immediate survival. They lack, as far as we can tell, the layered symbolism, the existential dread, the autobiographical narrative. So, the mere act of dreaming grants no special status. The spark of human consciousness, then, cannot be the dream itself. It must be what we times do, times with the dream. And what we did was perhaps the most peculiar and revolutionary act in the history of life on Earth. We did not just experience the dream, we captured it. We hauled its slippery, shimmering contents back into the waking world. The child with the vision of the elk felt a compulsion not just to feel it, but to share it. To do that, he had to translate the ineffable image in his mind into a sequence of grunts, gestures, and later, words. He had to create a stand-in for the elk, a representation that others, who had not shared his dream, could comprehend. He had to invent a symbol. The dream demanded it. In the act of telling, the private vision became a public artifact. It could be discussed, interpreted, feared, or revered. It could become the basis for a new hunting strategy, or the face of a new god. The dream, in forcing us to communicate the uncommunicable, may have been the primordial engine that drove us toward abstraction. It forced us to build a bridge between the inner universe of the mind and the shared reality of the tribe, using the first fragile bricks of symbolic thought. And so we are left not with an answer, but with a deeper mystery. If the dream was the catalyst, then the symbol was its legacy. But when did a simple mark cease to be just a mark and become a vessel for meaning? When did a line scratched in the dirt, or a shell pierced and strung, transform from a decorative object into a word, a prayer, a name? If the dream taught us to see the world twice, once as it is, and once as it times means times, then what was the first thing we ever tried to say? On a small, reddish-brown flake of silicious rock, 75,000 years old, found in a South African cave, there are a series of deliberate lines. They cross. They form a pattern. An X, repeated. A rudimentary lattice of scratches made by a hand wielding a stone tool. It is not a drawing of an animal, not a map to water, not a blueprint for a better spearhead. It holds no clear utilitarian value in the struggle for survival. It simply is. And in its stark, unadorned existence, it whispers a monumental question across the millennia. Was this the moment? Is this the first fossilized echo of an abstract thought, a symbol created for its own sake, a mark that meant something beyond the tangible, immediate world? The brain of the one who made those marks was, in its fundamental architecture, not so different from our own. We can trace the pathways now, the neural circuits that light up when we see a national flag or the golden arches of a fast food restaurant. The same regions, like Broca's area, that orchestrate the complex symphony of language also hum with the activity of conceptual thought. This is the biological cradle of symbolism. It is the moment the human mind began to perform a new kind of magic, to step back from the raw data of the senses, the sight of prey, the smell of rain, the feel of fear, and to assign to a sound, a gesture, or a scratch on a rock, a meaning that stood in for the thing itself. The brain had to first build the capacity to hold an idea separate from its physical referent, to see the concept of strength not just in the muscle of a lion, but in a drawing of one. The archaeological record is a fragmented ledger of this great awakening. Long before the caves of Lascaux and Altamira were painted with their breathtaking bestiaries, there were quieter, more intimate expressions. In the Blombos cave, alongside those cross-hatched ochres, were perforated shells, strung together, worn as adornment. A shell is no longer just a shell when it hangs from a neck. It becomes a bead, a token of identity, of beauty, or of social connection. At other sites across the globe, from the rising pigments in El Castillo to the notched tally sticks, we find the same impulse, to leave a mark that communicates, that represents, that times means asterisk. These are the first faltering words in humanity's long, collective story, written not in language, but in form and intention. We, their descendants, now live in a forest of symbols so dense we often forget to see the individual trees. A flag can summon tears of pride or waves of revolt. A corporate logo can trigger desire or disdain, a condensed packet of brand identity and cultural association. An emoji can convey a universe of nuance, sarcasm, joy, grief, in a single, digital glyph. Each is a compacted node of emotion, culture, and shared understanding, a testament to our inherited need to represent our world. And all of it, this vast and intricate architecture of meaning, arguably began with a few simple, deliberate scratches on a piece of stone. The journey from that X on an ochre fragment to the complex semiotic universe we inhabit was long, but the fundamental leap had been made. The mind had learned to encode the world. Yet, is the creation of a symbol the exclusive signature of a conscious mind? A honeybee returns to the hive and performs its intricate waggle dance, a precise code that communicates the direction and distance to a field of flowers. The other bees decode this signal and act. It is a representation, a signifier pointing to a signified. In a sense, it is a symbol. The bee understands it, but does it contemplate the times concept, times of distance? Does it hold an abstract idea of nectar source in its mind, or is it simply running a complex, pre-programmed script written by evolution? The symbol exists, but the depth of the internal experience behind it remains a profound mystery. This suggests that the mere act of using a sign is not the true threshold. The pivotal moment, then, may not be the creation of the symbol itself, but the act of infusing it with shared, abstract meaning. And perhaps no other human experience provided a more powerful, more terrifying catalyst for this than the confrontation with mortality. When a member of the group stopped moving, stopped breathing, grew cold, and began to decay, the raw, physical world offered a brutal and final conclusion. But the mind, now capable of symbolism, began to tell a different story. The body was here, but the person times was gone. Where did they go? What was this absence that felt so palpably like a presence? The first burial, the first body laid gently to rest with a handful of ochre dust or a simple flint tool, was a revolution. It was a symbolic act of immense proportions. It said, "This is not just an object, a piece of discarded flesh. This was someone, and their story is not over. This is the dawn of a new awareness." Death became the first true mirror in which humanity glimpsed its own consciousness. To mourn is to hold the concept of a person in your mind even when their physical form has vanished. It is to live with the symbol of them, the memory, the ghost of their presence. It requires a theory of mind and understanding that others have their own inner lives, their own thoughts and feelings, which can be extinguished. The treatment of the dead is the ultimate symbolic gesture, a bridge thrown across the chasm of the unknown. It is an argument against the finality of the physical, a testament to the power of the idea over the reality of decay. In that act of laying a body to rest, were we not, for the first time, truly laying the groundwork for the soul? And if the symbol was our first tool to grasp the invisible, then what happens when we turn that same tool upon the one who wields it and ask the most terrifying and beautiful question of all? What is this I that contemplates the X, that mourns the dead, that fears the void? The earth is cold and dark, a different kind of darkness from the night, one that swallows sound and time. 40 millennia ago, in this profound silence, someone's hands carefully arranged a body. It was not disposal, it was an act of placement. The bones were laid to rest in a specific posture, surrounded by stone tools, a cache of ochre pigment, and, most hauntingly, the fragile, fossilized dust of flowers. This person had died, but the living, the ones who remained in the world of light and wind, had wept, they had remembered. And in the deliberate, tender act of placing blossoms with the dead, they betrayed a terrifying, magnificent knowledge. They knew, perhaps for the first time on this scale, that they, too, would die. This is the great schism. An animal dies, its body ceases. But humanity? We are the species that does not merely die. We are the species that times knows asterisk. This awareness is a strange and burdensome fruit, born from a unique cognitive ability neuroscientists call mental time travel. Our minds are not tethered to the present. They can voyage backward, dissecting the past for lessons, and more consequentially, they can project themselves forward into a future that does not yet exist. We can stand on the solid ground of today and see, with terrifying clarity, the precipice that awaits us all. This is the biological bedrock of our profound unease. Is consciousness, then, not just a gift of awareness, but a sentence of foreknowledge? The archaeological record is a silent testament to this internal revolution. At Shanidar, in what is now Iraq, a Neanderthal man was buried in a fetal position, his body dusted with pollen from yarrow, cornflower, and hollyhock, a bouquet gathered and placed with intention. At Sungir, in Russia, 2 children were interred with a stunning wealth of grave goods, thousands of ivory beads that would have taken months to craft, spears made of mammoth tusk, and figurines. This was not mere sentiment. This was an economy of care, a significant expenditure of time and resources for those who no longer contributed to the tribe's survival. It speaks of a belief, however nascent, that death was not an end, but a transition. Were they equipping the dead for a journey? Were they appeasing a spirit, or honoring a memory that refused to fade? The silent graves shout a single truth. We began to treat death as a door, not a void. This primordial question, what happens to us when the body fails, has never left us. It is the engine of our grandest constructs. Religion, philosophy, and the modern practice of psychotherapy are all, in their own ways, elaborate responses to the same chilling draft from that open grave. They are the stories we tell to insulate ourselves from the absolute cold of oblivion. The awareness of our finitude is the great awakener. It pulls us from the blissful ignorance of mere existence and forces upon us the weight of meaning. If our time is limited, then how shall we spend it? Who shall we love? What shall we build? The clock's ticking is the metronome to which all human ambition and anxiety are set. Does the pressure of an ending give life its precious, diamond-like quality, or does it render all our striving ultimately absurd? Yet, are we truly alone in this knowledge? Observers have documented elephants lingering for days by the bones of a matriarch, gently touching the skull with their trunks. Dolphin pods have been seen supporting a deceased member at the surface, as if helping it to breathe, in a ritual of grief that can last for hours. Are these the first stirrings of a death consciousness, or are we, in our profound loneliness, projecting our own complex inner worlds onto what are merely sophisticated instinctual responses? Is their mourning a cognitive understanding of finality, or a deep, emotional bond severed, creating a confusion they cannot name? The line between instinct and awareness, between emotion and concept, seems to blur at the edges. Perhaps the difference is not one of kind, but of degree, the ability to articulate the storm within, to name the unnameable. And so, we return to that ancient gravesite. Whether born from pure emotion or the first flicker of abstract thought, the undeniable truth is this: death made us storytellers. The body in the ground was not just a body, it became a character in a narrative. It had a before, and now, because of the flowers and the tools, it had an after. The story was told, and then retold. It was passed down, changing subtly with each telling, gathering power and detail. It became a shared truth, a collective anchor in the face of the great unknown. And in that fertile ground of shared story, watered by fear and hope, the first seeds of belief began to sprout. If a story can give meaning to a single death, could a system of stories give meaning to all of life? What happens when a story becomes a system? When a solitary question transforms into a shared operating system for an entire culture? In the deep, silent dark of the Hohenstein-Stadel cave in Germany, a piece of mammoth ivory lay buried for millennia, waiting. When it was finally unearthed, it was not a tool or a simple figurine that emerged from the sediment. It was a creature that never was, a man with the body of a man and the head of a lion, standing upright, carved with a care that spoke of immense significance. This Lowenmensch, or Lion Man, is over 35,000 years old. In a world populated by tangible, immediate threats and prey, why would a human mind conceive of such a being? Was this the first God? A silent witness to the dawn of a new kind of thought, a bridge between the seen and the unseen? This act of creation points to a profound shift. It suggests a mind that could reach beyond the branches of the forest and the grass of the savanna to grasp at something abstract, something times other asterisk. This leap was not born in a vacuum. It is woven into the very fabric of our cognition. We are endowed with a mental trait known as agency detection, a hypervigilant system honed by evolution. In the rustle of the grass, our ancestors saw not just the wind, but the possibility of a predator. In a sudden clap of thunder, they heard not just a sound, but a furious intention. This instinct to see consciousness and purpose in the world around us was a survival mechanism, but it also opened a door. It allowed the wind to become a spirit, the sun a deity, and disease a curse. The invisible world began to populate with actors, and the first, tentative threads of belief were spun. Archaeology offers a chorus of evidence from across the globe, a testament to this universal human impulse. From the animal totems of hunter-gatherers to the elaborate grave goods of the first settled communities, from the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge to the sacrificial altars of the Aztecs, the pattern is unmistakable. This was not mere superstition in the modern, dismissive sense of the word. It was our ancestors' first and most comprehensive operating system for reality. It was a framework to explain the unexplainable, why the sun rises, why children die, why the rains fail. More importantly, it was a system to organize society, to assign roles, to codify morality, and to give a tribe a shared identity, and a common purpose. The rules were not just social contracts, they were divine decrees. The leader was not just a skilled hunter, he was a conduit to the ancestors. In the modern world, even as science has mapped the genome and probed the cosmos, this ancient operating system continues to run in the background. Religion provides a foundational bedrock for moral codes, for communal order, and for a sense of self that transcends the individual. The great myths and scriptures are not merely explanations for the universe's origin, they are mirrors held up to humanity. They ask us to see ourselves as beings with a role to play in a grand, cosmic narrative. They transform the raw, terrifying chaos of existence into a story with meaning, where suffering can be redeemed and actions have eternal consequences. Belief, in this sense, is not just about looking outwards to explain the stars, but about looking inwards to understand our own consciousness and our place within the whole. Yet, a compelling counter-narrative exists. Some argue that religion was never the primary program, but merely a byproduct, an emergent property of other, more fundamental cognitive functions. Perhaps it was a ghost in the machine of language, a side effect of our ability to use symbolic representation. Perhaps it blossomed from the soil of our sophisticated social intelligence and our theory of mind, our need to predict the behavior of others. Maybe it was a fortunate accident, a confluence of memory, storytelling, and communal living that created a powerful, self-replicating meme. If this is true, then the Lion Man is not evidence of a direct line to the divine, but a beautiful, poignant testament to a brain that had become so complex it began to generate its own ghosts, filling the silence of the cosmos with stories, because it could not bear the emptiness. So, where does that leave the ivory figure in the dark cave? Whether religion is humanity's primordial operating system or a magnificent byproduct of our other gifts may be a question that echoes without a final answer. Its origin may be less important than its function. Faith, in all its forms, became the crucible where humanity's deepest fears, its most ardent hopes, and its collective memories were fused together. It was the place where the tribe could unite not just in the hunt for food, but in the search for meaning. And when early humans found a way to articulate that shared experience, to give it structure and sequence and character, they unlocked a power far greater than any stone tool. They learned to tell a story. And in doing so, they began to tell the story of themselves. For if the Lion Man was the first character, who was the first storyteller? Imagine that scene, a circle of firelight pushing back an immense and predatory darkness. The faces are lit from below, shadows dancing across features, etched with the day's toil and the ever-present fear of the unknown. Then, a voice begins to speak. It does not just grunt a warning or signal a discovery. It weaves a tale. It speaks of the great lion spirit that taught them to hunt, of the ancestor who stole fire from the sky, of a time when animals could speak. In that moment, something miraculous happens. The past is no longer a disconnected series of events. It is reshaped into a narrative with cause and effect, with heroes and lessons. The future is no longer a complete mystery. It becomes a landscape of possibilities that can be predicted, planned for, and even warned against through parable. This act of storytelling is far more than simple entertainment. It is the loom upon which the fabric of consciousness is woven. When we tell stories, we are not merely recounting events. We are imposing order on chaos. We are selecting details, creating motivations, establishing consequences. We are practicing for life. The hunter who listens to a story about a failed hunt learns not to make the same mistakes. The mother who hears a story about a lost child feels a shared sorrow that strengthens communal bonds. Stories became the primary vehicle for transmitting knowledge, morality, and culture across generations, far more effectively than any list of rules or facts ever could. They are the original virtual reality, allowing us to live 1,000 lives and die 1,000 deaths without ever leaving the safety of the firelight. But the most profound story we ever tell is the one we tell about ourselves. What is consciousness, if not the ongoing narrative we construct from the moment we wake to the moment we sleep? It is the story of I. It takes the disparate, fragmented sensory inputs, the fleeting emotions, the half-formed thoughts, and it stitches them together into a coherent, linear autobiography. You are the protagonist of this story, your memories are the backstory, and your plans are the plot. This narrative self is not necessarily the absolute truth of our being. Neuroscience suggests it is often a confabulation, a post hoc justification for decisions made by subconscious parts of the brain, but it is the experience of being us. It is the story we believe in most deeply, the one we defend and refine until our last breath. The power of this self-narrative is immense. It can be a source of incredible resilience, allowing a person to frame their suffering as a trial that leads to growth. Yet, it can also be a prison, locking us into outdated identities and limiting beliefs. The stories we inherit from our families, our cultures, and our religions become the foundational chapters of our own personal novel. They tell us who we are supposed to be, what we should value, and what our purpose is. We spend our lives editing this manuscript, sometimes tearing out whole chapters, sometimes adding new, unexpected twists. The struggle for personal growth is often the struggle to change the story we tell about ourselves, to move from a tale of victimhood to one of agency, from a narrative of scarcity to one of abundance. And so, we are left with two profound creations, born from the same cognitive fire, the belief in something beyond ourselves, and the story we tell about ourselves. The Lion Man stands at the confluence of these two streams. He is a character in a shared myth, an object of belief, and a product of a mind that was beginning to narrate its own existence in a world filled with invisible actors. We used stories to explain the world, and in doing so, we explained ourselves into being. We became the animals who not only live, but who tell times the story of our living. The firelight has been replaced by the glow of screens, the cave walls by digital streams, but the impulse remains unchanged. We are still, and always, the storytellers. But if the self is merely a story, a compelling fiction woven from memory and perception, then who, or what, is the one who is listening? Night falls. The fire crackles, a pocket of defiant warmth against the immense, breathing darkness. An elder's voice, low and grainy as stone, tells of the giant beast that lives beyond the mountains, a creature of shadow and claw that took a life. A child listens, eyes wide, small hands clenched. The fear is a physical presence, a cold stone in the belly. Nothing emerges from the tree line, no eyes gleam in the firelight. And yet, they all see it. The beast is more real in its absence, meticulously painted by the shared brushstrokes of the narrative, a phantom born in the space between the teller's words and the listener's mind. This act, as ancient as the first hearth, is not mere entertainment. It is a fundamental technology of consciousness. Deep within the listening child's brain, a sophisticated neural ballet unfolds. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex thought and scenario planning, lights up with the task of constructing the beast, the mountain, the imagined consequence. Simultaneously, the hippocampus, the librarian of memory, activates, cross-referencing the story with past fears, the sound of a twig snapping, the memory of a predator's cry. We learn through simulation, and a story is the most potent simulator we possess. It allows us to run through potential realities, to experience danger and triumph from the safety of the campfire's glow, to build a library of cause and effect without having to suffer the consequences ourselves. This neurological impulse to narrate leaves its mark on stone. In the deep, silent bellies of caves like Lascaux and Chauvet, our ancestors painted their stories not as static portraits, but as dynamic sequences. A bison charges, a hunter aims, a line of figures moves with purpose. These are not mere images, they are frozen narratives, an early syntax of survival and experience. They represent a profound leap, the ability to capture a moment in time and space, to preserve a sequence of events, to say, this happened, and then this. It is the birth of history, of instruction, of a shared memory that outlasts a single lifetime. The story becomes a thread connecting generations, a way to pass on the map of a dangerous and beautiful world. From the epic of Gilgamesh wrestling with mortality to the intricate character arcs of a streaming series, the medium has evolved. But the core compulsion remains. We are a storytelling animal. We use narratives to teach, to warn, to bind our tribes together, to make sense of the chaos of existence. Some philosophers argue that consciousness itself times this capacity, the ability to weave the raw, disjointed data of our senses into a coherent, linear, and meaningful world. We do not just perceive, we narrate our own existence, casting ourselves as the protagonist in an ongoing saga. But does this singular talent truly set us apart? A challenge emerges from the forest. A vervet monkey emits a specific alarm call for an eagle, sending its troops scrambling for cover. A mother wolf brings back wounded prey for her pups to practice their hunting skills. Are these not rudimentary stories? A narrative of threat, a lesson in survival passed down without a single word? Perhaps the seed of storytelling lies not in language, but in the basic need to convey vital information. If so, then the chasm between their communication and our epics may be one of degree, not kind. Where, then, do we draw the line? Is our consciousness defined by the complexity of our tales, or by something more elusive, something that happens not in the telling, but in the receiving? The power of a story may not lie in its plot, but in its destination. It is not enough to broadcast a signal. The magic occurs when that signal is decoded, felt, and understood. When the child by the fire not only visualizes the beast but also feels the visceral fear of the fictional victim, when the listener begins to inhabit the emotional landscape of the teller, something extraordinary occurs. Consciousness, once a solitary flame contained within one skull, leaps the gap. It finds a resonance in another. It builds a bridge made not of stone or wood, but of shared understanding and mutual feeling. The story ceases to be a one-way transmission and becomes a shared territory, a common ground where I begins to blur into we. And in that moment, as the embers of the fire die down to a soft glow, one is left to wonder, is a story truly a story if no one is there to understand it? A child sees her classmate trip and fall on the rough asphalt of the playground. For a split second, her own face contorts, a silent wince echoing the other's pain. Then, without a moment's thought, she is there, a small hand extended, helping her friend to their feet. She felt no physical impact, yet she was moved to act. What invisible thread, woven deep within the architecture of her mind, pulled her across that short distance? This simple, everyday miracle of shared feeling is the quiet bedrock of our humanity, the first whisper of a consciousness that refuses to be confined by the skin. This biological magic has a name: mirror neurons. Scattered through key regions of our brain, these peculiar cells fire not only when we perform an action, but also when we witness someone else performing that same action. When you see a hand reach for a warm cup of tea, your own motor cortex hums with a faint, ghostly rehearsal of that reach. When you watch a film and the protagonist's face crumples in grief, your neural pathways associated with sadness flicker in sympathetic resonance. It is a kind of involuntary, neural echo, a built-in mechanism that allows the experiences of others to bleed into our own. This is the raw, physiological substrate of empathy, not a lofty ideal, but a tangible, electrochemical event. It is the foundation for a consciousness that can, quite literally, feel its way into another being. Is our sense of self, then, from its very inception, a communal project, built from the reflections we catch in the minds of others? Long before we had fMRI scanners to map this internal mirroring, our ancestors were living out its implications. The archaeological record offers silent, powerful testimony. In ancient grave sites, we find skeletons that tell stories of profound care, a man who lived for years with a crippling spinal deformity that would have made him wholly dependent on his tribe. The remains of an individual who survived for decades after a severe skull fracture, requiring constant feeding and protection. The bones of the elderly, worn smooth by time, carefully laid to rest with tokens of respect. These are not the remains of a society that valued only strength and utility. They are the artifacts of a community that could see suffering in another and feel a compulsion to alleviate it, even at a cost. Survival of the fittest, it seems, was sometimes tempered by the survival of the kindest. Does our capacity for empathy, then, represent one of our most significant evolutionary advantages, a tool that allowed us to build shelters made not just of wood and stone, but of mutual obligation? This ancient impulse ripples through the modern world in profound and complex ways. The entire concept of charity, the global outpouring of aid after a distant natural disaster, the visceral pull we feel when we see images of human suffering on the news, all are extensions of that same neural machinery. Art, in all its forms, is perhaps its purest expression. A novel lets us live 1,000 lives inside our own. A symphony can orchestrate a collective emotion in a hall of strangers. A painting can make us feel the artist's loneliness or joy across centuries. Through empathy, the barrier of the self becomes porous. Our consciousness is no longer a solitary lighthouse beam scanning a dark sea. It becomes part of a vast, interconnected network of lights, each illuminating the others. We begin to think not just in terms of I, but in terms of we. But is this we a genuine expansion of the self, or merely a temporary alliance of I's, each still fundamentally alone? For all its nobility, empathy is not a perfectly tuned instrument of pure altruism. It may have begun as a crucial evolutionary tool for social bonding, a glue for the small tribal groups in which our brains evolved. Its light shines brightest on those who are like us, those we can easily imagine being. We weep for a single child trapped in a well, yet statistics about millions in poverty can leave us cold. This is the bias of empathy. It is intimate, not scalable. Furthermore, this very same faculty can be weaponized. The demagogue who stirs up hatred for a foreign group does so by painting a vivid, terrifying picture of their times, intentions, hijacking our capacity to imagine the mind of another and filling it with fear. The advertiser who makes you feel a lack you never knew you had is manipulating your mirror neurons, making you mirror a desire that is not your own. Can the very mechanism that connects us also be the one that most effectively divides us? So, we are left with a paradox. Empathy allows us to step outside the fortress of the self, to live for a moment inside the heart and mind of another. It is the psychological cradle of love, art, and justice. Yet, in that very act of reaching out, we are simultaneously affirming the existence of our own separate self, the I that is doing the feeling, the I that is choosing to connect. It highlights the otherness it seeks to bridge. This expanded consciousness, this feeling of we, may be the most beautiful and fragile construct of the human mind. But if the bridge of empathy is built from the very planks of our own separate identities, can it ever truly collapse the distance between them? This delicate dance between connection and separation brings us to the other side of the coin, the very engine of that separate self. For the same consciousness that can expand to encompass another is also, and always, fiercely protective of its own center. It builds a name, a story, a territory of the mind. It knows what it is, and in doing so, it learns what it is not. And from that fundamental distinction, from the birth of the I against the backdrop of the world, emerges a force of immense creative and destructive power. It is the source of our pride and our poetry, our ambition and our anguish. It is the wellspring of the question, what about me? If empathy is the expansion of the self, then what is the cost of building its walls? He stands before the mirror, adjusting a stray lock of hair. The room is empty, the house is silent, no one is watching, and yet he feels the invisible gaze. He is being judged, assessed, and measured by the one person he can never escape. This silent critic, this internal spectator, is the architect of his posture, the curator of his expression. It is the self, the ego, the I, that watches the me, forever concerned with the presentation of a single, continuous character on the stage of life. This is the dangerous gift we all carry, a gift so intrinsic to our being that we seldom question its weight or its origins. We can begin to trace its contours not in the abstract realms of philosophy, but in the wet, gray matter of the brain. Nestled behind our foreheads, The prefrontal cortex hums with a unique and burdensome activity. This is the biological cradle of the self, the seat of our autobiographical sketch. It processes the image we hold of ourselves, our perceived social standing, the intricate map of our moral compass. When you feel a pang of embarrassment after a misspoken word, or a flush of pride at a public compliment, it is this region that lights up like a city seen from the night sky. It is the neural stage, where the drama of self-consciousness plays out, a constant, low-grade simulation of how we are being perceived by others. It grants us the power to see ourselves as objects, but in doing so, it also makes us vulnerable to our own critique. Is this internal watcher, then, just a byproduct of synaptic firings in a specific fold of the brain, a ghost in the machine that mistakenly believes it built the machine itself? The story, however, did not begin in the sterile confines of a neuroscience lab. It is etched into the oldest artifacts we have unearthed. An archaeologist brushes the dust from a necklace of shell and bone, found nestled against the skeleton of a person who lived 30,000 years ago. This was not merely decoration for beauty's sake. It was a declaration. A tattoo etched into preserved skin, an elaborate headdress carved from a mammoth's tusk, a pendant of polished amber. These were the first media. They were tools for broadcasting identity, for saying, I am a hunter, I am a shaman, I am part of this tribe. The self was not a private, internal secret, it was a performance, a story told to the world through the objects one wore and the marks one bore. The ego was already learning to project itself outward, to build a social skin long before it fully understood the creature living within it. If our identity is so deeply tied to the objects we use to adorn our bodies, what does that say about the self when it is stripped bare, absent its external props? This ancient impulse to perform has only been amplified in the modern hall of mirrors we have constructed. Social media platforms are not inventions so much as they are digital ecosystems perfectly tailored to an ancient biological and social need, the need to be seen, to be validated, to craft a narrative about who we are. The feelings of inadequacy, the sharp sting of envy, the fragile shield of pride, they all stem from the same source. The comparison between the I that I am and the ideal I that I believe I should be, an ideal often constructed from the curated highlights of others' lives. This consciousness, this self-awareness, is the tool that allows us to strive, to improve, to feel the warmth of accomplishment. Yet, the very same tool can become a prison. We can become so trapped in the management of our own image, so obsessed with the character we are playing, that we lose touch with the actor beneath the costume. Has the modern world, with its infinite reflecting surfaces, turned the ego from a useful tool for social navigation into a tyrant that demands constant appeasement? But what if this central character, this me, that feels so solid and real, is not a fixed structure at all? This is the radical whisper from the East, echoed by some schools of Western psychology. Zen traditions speak of the ego as a useful illusion, a confluence of ever-changing thoughts, sensations, and memories that the mind mistakenly glues together into a permanent entity. It is a story the brain tells itself for the sake of narrative coherence, a map it has drawn and then proceeded to believe is the territory. From this perspective, the man in front of the mirror is not adjusting the hair of his true self. He is tending to an image, a mental construct, a character in a story that has no single, permanent author. If the self is indeed a carefully maintained fiction, what is the nature of the consciousness that is doing the maintaining? Whether a biological reality or a persistent, pragmatic illusion, the ego has undeniably become the sun around which our mental solar system revolves. It is the center of our hopes, our fears, our memories, and our ambitions, and it is this very centrality that gives birth to its shadow. For the prefrontal cortex, the same organ that constructs the self, also possesses a singular and burdensome power. It can project that self forward in time. We do not merely live, we preview our lives. We run simulations of conversations not yet had, of failures not yet endured, of triumphs not yet achieved. This is the wellspring of our greatest achievements, but also the source of a uniquely human affliction. The gift of foresight is inextricably linked to the curse of worry. We are the only animal that knows, with terrifying certainty, that it will die, and the only one that can agonize over a social misstep that happened 5 years ago or might happen next Tuesday. The ego, having imagined its own future, now has something precious to lose. And so, we arrive at the next layer of the human condition, the inevitable consequence of a self that can contemplate its own trajectory. If the ego is the protagonist of our inner story, then anxiety is its constant, whispering narrator. The man leaves the mirror, his hair now perfectly in place, but a new unease has taken root. He is due at a meeting, a party, a date. He has imagined it a dozen times, each scenario a different branch on the tree of potential outcomes. The prefrontal cortex, the cradle of the self, is also the engine of this relentless prospecting. It allows us to plan, to strategize, to build civilizations. But this same capacity forces us to live not just in the present moment, but in a phantom realm of what if. We are haunted by the paths not taken and terrified by the potential pitfalls that lie ahead. We don't just fear the predator in the bushes, we fear the awkward silence, the failed project, the critical glance. We are afraid, ultimately, of living wrongly, of making choices that fracture the carefully crafted image in the mirror, that betray the ideal self we are striving to become. This is a fear that has no immediate physical threat, yet it can trigger the same primal cascade of cortisol and adrenaline as a confrontation with a wild beast. The body's ancient alarm system is now being hijacked by the modern, self-conscious mind. This biological anxiety is the tax we pay for our sophisticated consciousness. It is the dissonant hum in the background of our achievements, the price of having a self that cares about its own story. The man's heart might pound as he walks into the room, his palms growing damp. His biology is responding to a threat that exists only in the theater of his own mind, a drama written, directed by, and starring his own ego. The very organ that allows him to conceive of a future self he can be proud of is also the one that makes him sick with worry that he will not become it. So, if our consciousness is both the author of our ambitions and the source of our dread, can we ever truly silence the anxious narrator without extinguishing the creative voice of the self?